We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold these truths.
We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Welcome back, folks. This is a special podcast because we're really hitting the current events between Israel and Iran, and the potential for the United States to even enter in one way or another. Of course, President Trump is weighing those options as we speak, and so I'm having a return guest, my friend Ralph Goff from former CIA. 35 years in. We did a podcast very recently, so our regular listeners. It got to know you pretty well there. But of course, our conversation at that time was pretty broad. I mean, we talked to Israel, we talked to the Middle East, but we mostly, I think it was a cool conversation. We mostly gave people some insight into, how do you even join the CIA? What is it like? What is life like? So today, because you served in the Middle East and have a lot of experience with this particular problem set, thought you'd be a great guy to bring on and just sort of analyze what's true and what isn't about what the heck is going on. Before we started talking, I was trying to remember if we had made any predictions about what would happen, and I don't think we had. Like you said, I don't think we had. But obviously, that line has been crossed. So let's just start there. Like, why? I mean, why does Israel make that decision now? What are the factors that changed?
Hey, Dan, good to see you again. Thanks for having me back. Iran is a particularly thorny issue for Israel, right? And it's something where it's an issue that shows the stark differences between the United States and Israel on a single issue, Iran, right? Like for Israel, Iran has been an existential threat, right? For the United States, Iran has never been an existential threat, but they've been a major disruptor, a real pain, right? They threaten our forces that are based in the Gulf. They threaten our allies in the region, right, including Israel. But for Israel, it's been an existential threat. So, the two questions, why now and what are they going to do, right? Very complicated. The answers are based on a lot of the history, right, of conflict between these two, the actions of Iran, particularly as Iran steadily rose in prominence as a regional power, built an impressive network of proxies that they could use, right? You had the Hamas in Gaza, you had Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis to a lesser extent down in Yemen, you had Syria, right, the Syrian regime. They just had Israel literally surrounded. For a country that didn't share a border with Israel, Iran really made its presence felt against Israel, right? They had that state beleaguered through their proxies. And I think the question now stems from what's happened to those proxies, right? Hamas is shattered, all right? They can still put up a fight, but they're no longer the threat they once were. Hezbollah, same, shattered, right? The Houthis, never really much of a threat, just a nuisance. Syria, off the map, literally, right? There's a new president, new government. Mossad is gone, right? All of Iran's allies have been removed from the region, pretty much. Their proxies have been either removed, seriously reduced, or made irrelevant. So it's Iran on its own, and that kind of explains the timing, partially. The rest of it is the Iranian nuclear question, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of debate now as to.
But to sum up what you just said, I mean, to sum it up in one word, Iran is weak at the moment, weaker than they have been in a long time, and no longer holds the multiple guns to the head of Israel that it can be a step removed from.
That's right.
It's a major shift in the power dynamics.
And the major shift is, as I said, Iran was a existential threat to Israel. One can argue that right now it's not, right? But if it acquires a nuclear weapons capability, then it becomes an existential threat again. So, you have this window now, whereas, before Iran was all powerful with its proxies without nukes, and now they don't have the proxies, they don't have the nukes. So, one could argue from a strictly pragmatic viewpoint that the timing is perfect for Israel.
Yeah, and what do you say to those? Well, you had a second point you were about to make. I just wanted to kind of summarize the first point about Iran
No,
being
no, yeah,
weaker.
that's fine. That's right. Yeah, that was the point. Yeah,
Yeah, that was.
this
I mean,
window.
yeah, I mean it's a window, and there's a obvious assumption that I mean the Iranians have been messing with us for I don't even know how many years at this point about their nuclear program. Um, what's your insight into how they think about this? Has it always been? Do they truly want the bomb as a leverage point, or do they kind of know in the back of their minds that as soon as they get the bomb, we're going to destroy them? Or was it always a negotiation tactic? But if it was a negotiation tactic, they haven't done a good job negotiating. I mean,
Yeah,
well, I mean, they miscalculated it.
yeah,
Like you're, especially in your weakened position, it's like they miscalculated their own position. President
yeah,
Trump gave them an opportunity. I don't know this for a fact, but it seems pretty obvious to me that Israel wanted to engage in these strikes earlier, like just a couple of months ago. And I think the
yeah,
president said, "Could you just please hold on, let us
yeah,
check all the boxes?" And I think that was the responsible thing to do. Let us
yeah,
check all these boxes so that we can at least have the moral high ground here. 'Cause trust me, that'll be better strategically. And I think the president's right
yeah.
about that. Again, it's a little bit of conjecture. I don't know what those conversations were, but it
Right.
seems pretty obvious that's how it worked out.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I agree.
so, wait, there was a question wrapped in there, I think, but I can't, I'm not even sure what it was. Oh, yeah. How does the Iranian mindset help us understand the Iranian mindset here? Because it's irrational at this point. I think it has
Yeah,
often been
yeah,
rational, it's been self-serving, and now it
yeah,
seems irrational.
yeah. And I think it's important to remember too that the mindset there's actually several mindsets, right? Right. You've got the hardliners. There are Shia religious hardliners who probably would see it as their duty once they had a nuclear weapon to attack Israel, right?
Mhm.
Then you have more moderates. They're not really liberal, but they're less hardline. They say, okay, we just need a nuclear capability as a deterrent, right? And nothing proves
Mhm.
that better than what they're going through right now. If they had a nuclear capability, right? If they had developed the bomb, the Israelis would not be striking them with the impunity with which they're striking them, right? Then
Right.
then you have the supreme leader himself who issued a fatwa saying that nuclear weapons are amoral, and he's forbidden the development of nuclear weapons. So there are the hardliners there that, as much as they love their supreme religious leader, they're kind of waiting for the old guy to die so that they can get the fatwa lifted, and go back to work and develop a bomb in short order, right? So
Well,
there isn't one single mindset there.
yeah, that's all great points. Well, let's dig into the fatwa for a second. So did that come out in 2000? That was in 2004, right? Am I getting the year
Yes,
right that he issued
yeah,
that?
yeah. That
Now,
sounds about right.
so I guess my question is, did he do it because he actually believed in it, or did he do it because he saw George Bush invade two countries, and one of which was over the WMD thing? Was that just a self-serving thing? And of course, he's allowed his government to continue, again, doing uranium enrichment that is so obviously not for civilian purposes.
Right.
So I'm just trying to like, what does he really believe? I mean, it seems to me he made a political decision. I don't think it's like a moral decision, right? He said, his words are it's
Yeah,
amoral, but what do
yeah.
you think? Is it more
He,
sounds
he,
like
he,
more political reasoning.
he couched it in moral terms, and I think that he does hold on to some level of belief in the immorality of nuclear weapons, right? But that doesn't mean he doesn't think that they should eventually have one. I think he looks at the West. The West is amoral, right? We have the nukes,
Mm,
but he looks at that from a standpoint not just of religion, but of how do we achieve military parity with these countries. So he knows the bomb is the answer, but it's very complicated because to build a bomb, it's expensive, right? And the you know the the pressure campaign of the Trump administration hurt them economically, set them back, right? The country Iranians, people tend to forget that they've been suffering under sanctions for decades now, and the economy there is not the greatest, and the cost of weapons. There's a lot of people in the Iranian populace there who say, "Why are we wasting money on these weapons that just get us in trouble when what we need is to get our economy back on track by getting the sanctions lifted?" Right. So there's all
yeah.
kinds of domestic reasons there, along with religious reasons, and cost and all that. So, but I would say that the results of the current Israeli air campaign would give more weight to the argument that they need to have a nuke to prevent this. But it may be too late.
Well, yeah, and it's funny how it's really kind of this chicken or the egg conversation, sort of
Yeah.
like whose fault is it? I mean, like I'm still going to go with it's Iran's fault because they've been using proxies to just disrupt the region. If they hadn't done that at all this entire time,
Yeah,
nobody would care about them. Like
that's
we would,
right.
like it's so the fault is theirs. I mean, but they obviously have a different view, and that I think that just goes back to thousands of years of history and just this kind of this anti-Western fervor that
Yeah,
Americans can't understand. We are not capable of understanding it, so don't try. Just know that
yeah,
they hate you,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and that's it. It's just part of their belief system.
Right, and
And so
there is this rocky history between the United States and Iran, right? They blame us for installing the Shah's regime, which then was overthrown in 1979 by Ayatollah Khamenei, and then they blame us for the Iran-Iraq War when Saddam Hussein saw an opportunity to attack Iran, right,
mhm.
in the 80s there, and then the payback came when we were in Iraq, and the IRGC really came to power in that time by aiding, the Shia rebel, in particular, against the United States. Right, we're all of us who served in Iraq still remember how brutally efficient the explosively formed projectile IEDs were against our troops. Right, the IRGC, they're responsible for the death and maiming of thousands of U.S. servicemen and women. Right, so frankly, we still kind of owe them for that, and taking Soleimani off the table was a bit of a payback for that, right? So we have this history of conflict with Iran, proxy conflict, but conflict nonetheless, right?
Yeah, and like you said, they're not an existential threat now, but they do develop ICBMs. They are pushing towards a nuclear warhead. It is not impossible that they become a pretty major threat. I mean, existential,
Yeah,
where we have a big country, you can't bomb the whole thing, but one
right.
major city getting hit with a nuke is that's kind of it falls pretty close to existential. So
Yeah.
obviously that's our interest too, and
Mm-hmm.
I one of the things I say, I don't know, you probably agree with it. I remind people that the great Satan is us. It's not Israel. Maybe they call Israel that, but there can't be two great Satans. Maybe they're just a lesser Satan, but we're the great Satan. So
That's right.
Israel's always been the speed bump to get to us, and I think there's a lot of people, and you're seeing this play out, and we'll get to the Tucker and Cruz conversation.
Mm.
But you're kind of seeing this misunderstanding play out. It's like, no, you got it wrong. Like we're not the ones protecting them, but we're the ones using them to protect us. And now it's a mutually beneficial relationship, but they are the speed bump to us. We're the ones the Iranians truly hate, and I think people forget that. And then going back to the Israeli incentive structure now, it's like, and the Iranian incentive structure now. So now that, yeah, you're right. The Iranians have more reason than ever to right now to wish they had some kind of deterrent. Um, but also but since the Israelis know that they know that I mean, what do you think? The Israelis, I don't see any reason why they would stop until those two additional facilities that are deep underground. Was it 216 and then I always forget. It starts with an F. I always can never remember that.
Fordo. Yeah,
Fordo.
Fordo. Yeah. Yeah.
Until those are gone, because that's where the real stuff is.
Yeah.
Sounds like they've already destroyed Natanz. But most of the enrichment, the weapon that's close to weapons grade is in those. That's why they're buried very deep. And so I mean, I cannot see a scenario where Israel just stops. Like I can't see a scenario, but tell me if you see one where Iran's like, you know what, we'll do whatever you want, just stop. Like, is that even remotely on? Even if they did, would Israel actually stop?
You know, I've been talking to several of my former colleagues on that one. We've been hashing that one out because it's such a fundamental question, right? Like, where is this thing going to go? And do the Iranians have some sort of off ramp here? Do the Israelis have an off ramp, right? And I think the consensus is if you're the Israelis, you're like, yeah, we're in it now,
You're committed.
we're committed. The interesting thing I've seen, arguments both ways. The U.S. needs to come in, or the U.S. should stay out. Frankly, I think I'm more of the latter, of letting the Israelis. We can support them from behind the scenes and let them take the lead. I mean, people keep saying, well, they need the bunker busters to take out Forda. I don't know. Some of us have discussed that. It's like, it's an underground facility, which means, you bomb the entrances, you bomb the air shafts, you cut off the power supply, right? And that thing is useless. It's buried under a rock. And with the freedom of movement that the Israeli Air Force has over Israel, you close that thing off, and then you tell the Iranians, like, go ahead and try and dig it up. We'll just bomb it again, right? And in the meantime, that's where you can put the pressure on the Iranians, like, all right, time to come to the table and talk this thing out. And I think that's a strategy that would actually gain some traction with the Iranian people, right? Because now the what used to be a forbidden term, much like Voldemort, he who shall not be named, it was regime change, right? The policy that shall not be named, and that's crept into the conversation a lot lately, right? And you see all these public polls now. Should the U.S. be involved in regime change in Iran, and should we support regime change, and should it be the goal? And Frank, I have been saying for years that nothing in Iran will change without regime change, right? It's that regime. Their attitude towards Israel, their attitude towards the bomb, their support for proxies, right? It all revolved around the regime with the religious authoritarian regime. And that regime has been having a lot less support over the years, right? There have been several uprisings by the Iranian people. And at some point, one of those uprisings is going to succeed.
Yeah. And I think, and President Trump, I think, recently announced that within the next 2 weeks he'll make a decision. And I'm assuming the factors that are going into that decision is simply kind of like you outlined. Do we need the bunker busting bomb or not? So there's pros and cons to that. There's one scenario which you laid out, which you can basically close it off and continue closing it off indefinitely, assuming they're trying to reopen it, assuming that the regime stays in power. But I also would say that the Israelis seem to have a pretty clear goal of cutting the head off of the regime completely, and I don't think they're going to stop until they get there. Now, that forces us to be involved in some way, shape, or form because, I mean, you look at the descendant of the Shah or whatever other group claims, some kind of power and exile of Iranian government. We'd have to have some kind of ties and involvement with whoever goes in. I think that there's going to be a desire for stability, and the online craziness right now. And I hate those polling questions because they're so stupid, right? They're not specific enough.
Yeah.
Because they're so useless, and pollsters should be fired for even asking them. Should the U.S. be involved in regime change? There are so many details that need to be sorted out with that question before you can give a solid answer. Like, what do you mean involved? Involved in helping the descendant of the Shah go to Iran and safely? Sure, why not? I mean, if there's no government, maybe that's a good idea. Involved in dropping a single bomb to get rid of this facility once and for all, or involved in putting thousands of troops on the ground. What do you mean by involved? And now I'm pretty sure, again, I can't speak for the president, but it seems to me the only actual actions being considered would be the bunker busting bomb. Now, the reason you might want to do that, we can let's go through that real quick, like pros and cons. So there's a variety of ways to deal with this. One way is, like you said, kind of bomb the periphery of it, which I think it's already been done. But it doesn't stop the existing, enriched uranium, right? In theory, they could still dig it out if the regime somehow maintained power and the Israelis gave up. Another option is an Israeli ground operation. That carries with it a whole bunch of risk, but they also own the skies at this point, and they're continuing to strike, military targets. So how much Iranian resistance could there be? Now, that'd be a safer way to dismantle a nuclear facility, in theory, right? As opposed to bombing it. But it's, I actually don't know the answer to this question. We need to talk to some nuclear scientists. If you did use the bunker busting bomb, does that create nuclear fallout? I don't know. It's really deep underground. Maybe it's all contained. I have no idea. So I think our government and I think everybody's kind of going through these questions right now. But it does appear to me that there's again, the Israelis are committed to regime change. The regime shall fall. Like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
seems to be definitive at this point.
Mhm.
And Trump is seems to be on board with that in a sense, because he's like, look, I gave you guys every option possible. You didn't want to take it, so deal with the consequences. And then you get to the interesting debates we're seeing online. Well, we're going to get dragged into World War III. I'm like, that's one of the more annoying arguments that I hear. I'm
Yeah.
like, first of
Yeah.
all, for you to call this World War III, the world has to be involved. I mean, definition, words matter here. That's
Yeah.
great powers have to be at war with each other for you to describe something as World War III.
Yeah.
So that's just a
Absolutely.
stupid, and there's zero chance of that happening. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think anybody is getting involved in this. So that's nonsense. And I think it's furthermore nonsense that any of the scenarios that play out over the next few weeks necessitate our own ground troops there. So that seems to be, I don't want to say all the way off the table, but it seems to be almost certainly off the table because it just doesn't feel operationally necessary.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's, I think there's just a section on the far left and the far right that are so deeply isolationist and naive about how the world works that they one, I mean, somebody like Tucker Carlson, I mean, never misses a chance to run to the defense of America's enemies, and he's finally being exposed for it. I mean, I've been exposing him for a long time, but like this is, he's in the minority on this one, thank God.
Yeah.
He's not doing so well. I don't, his incentive structures are could be a number of things. But in any case, he makes very dishonest arguments. And one of the things I point out
Mhm.
is when you try to scare people into this scenario of World War III, troops on the ground, you're doing so because you're malevolently trying to get the American people not to defend their own self-interest. It's a
Mhm.
really disgusting tactic. It's I would almost say it's treacherous. I mean, it's
Yeah.
treason.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
I mean,
you're
yeah, Dan, it's just like the arguments that, they were making against support to Ukraine, right? Like, wow, it starts with us giving them weapons. Then the next thing, we've got boots on the ground and American troops are fighting the Russians and we have World War III. Now, the Ukrainians didn't ask for a single American soldier, right? Not a single American soldier a service person has died, right? In Ukraine. Sure, some veterans have died going over there and volunteering to fight in the Foreign Legion, right? But no active duty, no boots on the ground there. So it's a really hollow argument. And the Ukrainians, they just want the weaponry to fight their own battle. And as far as like boots on the ground in Iran, that's a non-starter. And in terms of regime change, there's a huge difference between fomenting regime change and enabling regime change. And I think the time is right, both for the United States and for Israel and our other partners, to enable regime change. Right? Let the Iranian people decide their own fate. They have bravely risen up several times in the past with no help from the outside. Right? And they don't really want foreign involvement there. They want to do this themselves, right? There's a stigma of foreign involvement, and that has to do, I think, with some of the cockamamie regime change schemes that the United States was part of in the 50s and 60s there, right? So, enabling regime change, that's a big difference from taking part in regime change. And I think
right.
there's a huge window of opportunity for enabling it.
Yeah, and it is, people's minds obviously just go right to the Iraq War. And I think we've discussed that before. I've discussed it
Yeah.
many times on this podcast. Yeah,
Yeah.
look, in
Okay.
hindsight, maybe we wouldn't do it, but I would also point out that in hindsight, it is, I think 100% what caused Khomeini to issue the fatwa in 2004 that said no nuclear weapons. And I think it's entirely possible and I would say very, very, very probable that if we had just left the Middle East alone the last 25 years,
Mhm.
that Iran would get a nuclear bomb, and Saddam would get a nuclear bomb to deter each other because they
Right.
hate each other, and they both hate Israel.
Yeah.
And then Israel would probably openly have nuclear weapons,
Yeah.
so you can imagine a very scary future had we not done that.
Oh yeah.
It's just I only point that
Would have,
out
would
to
have,
people
would have
just
opened
as
up
as
an
a way to critically think about
unprecedented,
the
yeah,
past.
would have opened up an unprecedented arms race. Because remember, you know, uh, when Iran gets the bomb, if and when Iran gets the bomb, that's the Persian bomb, right? That's not an Arab bomb, right? It's a
Right.
Persian bomb and it's a Shia bomb, right? Now you have all these Sunni Arab states who will not be thrilled to see a Persian Shia nuclear capability. They're going to want the same. And we're talking about Turkey, we're talking about Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, right?
Yep.
So, an arms race would not have been just limited to Iraq and Iran. It would have spread wildly throughout the Middle East.
Yeah, and I think that's nobody says that enough, right? Because everybody's sort of scared of the topic.
Mm.
I'm not because look, I didn't have any part in making that decision. People act like I do. It's kind of funny. I'm like, I was in college, guys. I was like, no, I did not vote for any wars. You warmonger. I'm like, how am I mongering? What wars are my mongering? I did fight in them, but I'm not the one who's mongering, you idiots. Um, but I don't know, Ralph. I mean, but do you really know what you're talking about? I mean, do you even know the population of Iran?
That's a good question. I was trying to look that up. I know it's fast growing. I'm trying to think how many millions it is. You probably know. You looked it up.
Okay, well, clearly you didn't see the clip that I'm talking about. I'm
I,
referencing
I
with
heard about
Tucker.
it. I heard about it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
But it was just this. It's such Senator Cruz should have
yeah,
known that Tucker knows nothing but disingenuous, cheating
yeah,
arguments. That's just how he operates, right? And it's like,
yeah,
and the sad part is, and Cruz obviously answered. He's like, that's irrelevant. What 80 million, 90? Because Tucker's like, it's
yeah.
92 million. How
I
do you not
just,
know that? It's
yeah,
like, how is that relevant?
yeah,
I should. And by the way, the only relevant thing we need to know is that they want a nuclear weapon, and they call us the Great Satan, and they want us
yeah,
wiped. Death to America is their chant. What else? Actually, what else do you need to know? I
yeah,
mean, it's,
yeah,
but it was
yeah,
such, I didn't watch the whole 2 hour interview. I will never do
yeah,
that to myself, but it was,
yeah.
just such
Yeah,
a
but the thing too
disingenuous
with
take.
Iran, like I always figure they're like 75, 80 million, but I guess, yeah, 90. Iran is made up of different ethnic groups too, right? There's the Azerbaijani population in the northwest, right? You've got an Arab population down in the south, right? You have the Persian population, and then of course there's Kurds and everybody else here. So it's not
There's
uh,
even a Jewish population, if I'm not totally crazy, isn't
a
there? I
very
mean,
small one. It
very
used to be
small.
larger, but a small one that
It
that they don't
exists.
mess with actually, that they actually do not mess with, which is interesting. But it's not a heterogeneous population. So, and this is another area where people say, well, if the regime falls, then Azerbaijan is going to try and steal parts of the northwest, and the Turks are going to get involved, and Russia's going to get involved, and Arab state, and it'll be like Syria, right? So a lot of people raise the specter of another Syrian
Yeah.
disaster with
Yeah.
Iran.
You're getting to the question I was going to ask you exactly, which is like exactly this. So I don't want to interrupt you. Keep going.
No, that's that's the end of my spiel on that one. But what's your
Well, okay.
question?
Well, yeah. I mean, my question is, does it really turn out that way? Because I'm not so sure it does. They
No,
do have these
it's
ethnic
not a
divisions.
given.
It's not a given,
Yeah,
right? I mean, it's because
yeah,
I explain. I'm like, look, Iraq, Syria. These are deep, deep tensions between Sunni and Shia populations. Like you have that was always a civil war. Just it's like Lebanon too. I mean, these
yeah,
places were designed for civil wars, like kind of literally designed by European powers by drawing the borders around them.
yeah,
Almost like literally designed to have civil wars eventually. And people try to make the same argument about Iran because of these different ethnic populations that you described, but you know a lot about the culture there. Like, how true could that be? Is that really what the people there want?
no, no. They don't. I mean, the vast majority of the people of Iran just want to live their lives, right? They want sanctions gone. They want, they don't want war. They want to be able to, get good education. They're an educated populace. So Persians are always considered very literary, very well educated people, right? They have those traditions where they value education. You know, uh, I think the greatest tragedy in the last century has been that the Persians would have been great allies for the United States in the Middle East, right? But
Yeah,
and they were
yeah.
for a time, right? But once the religious minority took over, that ended. And I've met a lot of Iranian expats, and I've met Iranian officials over the year. And when they're not under the prying eyes of their counterintelligence people, they love talking to Americans, right? And look, now they've got well, it's probably turned off now, the internet, but they've had so much access to Western media and Western news sources. They know what the world is like out there. They're very worldly, right? And that's what they want. They want that for their kids, and they have demographically, they have this huge population bubble of young people now. I forget the number of people that are, below the age of 30. It's like, 50 something percent or something, right? It's a huge burgeoning population. And these people, they need education, they need jobs, right?
Yeah.
And an expensive nuclear program isn't going to solve that.
No, it's not. And it doesn't mean that there's not going to be problems. It doesn't mean a transition is going to be easy. But again, I think people have these whatever motives somebody like Tucker has to do everything he can to prevent any sort of action against America's enemies.
Yeah.
The reality is he's selling you facts that just really don't bear themselves out when if you know the territory. And like you said, like they've been wrong about World War III and Russia and Ukraine every single day since the Russian invasion. So every single day
Yeah.
that goes by, they're wrong again.
Yeah.
I should tweet about it every day. Hey, you're wrong again.
Yeah.
Every morning,
Yeah.
you're wrong again. Still wrong. Still, and you're gonna be wrong this time too. Like
and
it
the
doesn't.
irony is, Putin was counting on that. Vladimir Putin was counting on that, and the mullahs are going to count on the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, although it seems like the ship has sailed. I wonder what they're thinking now, if they're able to even think about anything. They're probably all in hiding. Do you have an opinion on? I can't remember the name of the groups again. There's the Shah descendant, but there's a couple other groups too that because they'll come and meet with members of Congress. They have been for years. So I
Yeah.
mean they have a very strong presence in the United States.
Right.
They um I don't know. I don't think we really have a policy on who we'd actually want there. In the end, what we
Yeah.
want is the Iranian people to kind of figure it out themselves.
Yeah.
But you need some sense of stability for that to happen. So that's where things get complicated. How do you create that? How do you allow for that stability, create that stability, while also not making anyone think that you're there to tell them what to do? That's where it gets delicate in the Middle East.
Yeah. 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 I mean, these groups, it's kind of reminiscent of Iraq in a way where, you had these exile groups of, Iraqi Democrats, like what was his name? Ahmed Chalabi, remember, leader of the
Mhm.
Free Iraqi Army, and others. And these guys were just not at all legitimate, right? They were out of touch with the people. They had no legitimacy with the Iraqi people. They were corrupt. They were clearly seeking power for power's sake, right? And they just added to the confusion, if you will, in the early parts of the invasion of Iraq as to what to do for a government there, right? And they were quickly discredited. As soon as any of them got close to power, they were quickly discredited. But and the same thing with these groups of Iranian expatriates that claim to have some legitimacy, whether it's the Shah's descendants or descendants of other political figures, but having been burned by these types of people before in the past, Western intelligence and Israeli intelligence, they're very wary of these types, right?
Mhm.
And I will say, in the discussions that I had while I was still serving, when we talked about regime change, and I was one of the few who actually would bring it up. I was towards the end of my career. I had nothing to lose, so I could say what I wanted, and I would talk about regime change, and the consensus was that yeah, it has to be indigenous, it has to be driven by the Iranian people, and they have to decide for themselves, and they're actually perfectly capable of doing that, right? They're actually very brave people when you consider the few times that they have risen up where they've been brutally suppressed by the regime. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the only thing that's kept that regime in power is the fact that they even the moderates, right? And I use the term moderate very loosely. Even the moderates have been quick to unleash the Basiji religious police or the IRGC or the street thugs, right, on their own people. So the Iranian people, they've been brutalized. They're going to be careful, but they're seething, right? And this war, I think the Israelis have done a good job so far of avoiding civilian casualties because that's crucial. And you look at the difference between what the Iranians are hitting in Israel, what the Israelis are hitting in Iran, and look, the Iranians hit a hospital facility today in Israel, right? They're hitting primarily civilian targets, right, because they're easier to
Mhm.
hit than military targets, whereas the Israelis are still striking Iranian military targets. So there's a clear difference in targeting methodology here that I think is related to this argument.
Israeli capabilities just as well as anybody. Israelis as well as anybody. What did anything surprise you about the way they conducted this operation? I thought it was pretty impressive that they had a hidden drone factory just outside Tehran. That was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Um, it reminds us of the Ukrainian operation recently. Also reminds us that it's very hard to do in countries like that, and kind of scares me as to how easy it would be to do to a country like ours. That's a whole separate subject.
Yeah.
But did anything surprise you there? I mean, Mossad continues to do amazing things. Like,
Yeah.
uh, you
I'm
know,
never surprised. I'm never surprised by Mossad, right? Um, just because they have such a track record, right, of doing the unexpected. And it was kind of when I dealt with Israelis, I had, you know, my two ground rules were one, never be surprised, right, and two, never take it personal, right. The Israelis, and by the two combined, because the Israelis, it's very easy to predict what they'll do because they always follow what are in their best national security interests, right. If those national security interests uh, overlap with our national security interests, that's great. But if they don't overlap, that's fine to them too, right? They're very
mhm,
consistent in following their own interests. So,
yeah,
I'm never really surprised by them and their capabilities because they've been forced to deal so with such a ruthless enemy as Iran, and which they don't share a common border, right? So they've had to be creative to get in there.
right. And
They
I want to ask you about that. I don't know
yeah, they never
how
surprised
much you'll
me.
tell me, but I mean, well, so like, let's take this operation for instance, hiding a bunch of drones just outside Tehran, that are
Yeah.
ready to go. That's quite the operation.
Mhm.
Now, since I haven't had a classified briefing on it,
Yeah.
and I'm assuming you haven't either, well, I'm free to hypothesize about how the hell they
Yeah.
did it. So,
Yes, we can get that.
otherwise, you and I are both in positions where we couldn't say anything. That's sort of how it
Yeah.
works. So,
Yeah.
it's annoying sometimes because obviously, and you know this, like, I'll get a classified briefing. Now, that thing is all over the news, but I cannot confirm it. I'm not
That's
allowed to
right.
talk about it. It's
That's
just,
right.
I have to be like, I have to say, well, the thing you're talking about, yes, the New York Times reported on it. This is what it means if it's true.
Yeah.
Like, but
Yeah.
this thing we have not been briefed on, and I don't know if we ever will be. But and I guess my question is, and something I've never really known, and maybe it's a mix of both. How does Mossad actually infiltrate Iran? Is it with their own people, agents, or is it all recruited agents inside, or is it a mix of both? And how would
It,
they do this? I
yeah.
mean, do they just grow up speaking Persian and just learning to fit in perfectly into Iranian society? Or are they just that they've just been training for this their whole lives? Is it those kind of people? How does this even play out? And
So
if you don't want to say, then that's okay too.
no, I mean it's just based on literature I've seen from books, and from what I see in the news and all. It's all proxies, and also look, Mossad is a global service, right? Jews are a global people, right? So they have resources global, across the globe that they can count on. And because there's such a dedication to the preservation of the Jewish state amongst Jews, right? They have a huge advantage in recruiting people to their cause. They get people to their cause who are believers, right? Whether it's
Hmm.
based on religious beliefs or just based on Zionism, right? They have that advantage. And then, let's never forget good old fashioned greed, right? Iran is maybe a police state, but it's a corrupt police state, right? You can
Mm,
bribe people there.
mm.
People there bribe officials to get out. They bribe people to get in, right? They bribe people to get what they need there. So,
Bribe for everything, as far as I hear, right? It's like if you want to open up a store, everything is a bribe, right?
yep,
That's what I hear.
yep,
Yeah,
yeah, right. So it's a natural extension to, bribe
interesting.
to get things in. I mean, I think the Ukrainians found Russia to be the same way. It's a criminal state, so you deal with criminals, and the currency
Hmm.
for dealing with criminals is corruption, and in you go. So I think for the Israelis in Iran, it was a combination of all those factors.
This is the last thing I want to address. This also came up in the Tucker Cruz interview, and Tucker kind of, I mean, stumped Cruz on this a little bit. Again, with very unfair tactics, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Presenting quarter truths in a very vague way. And I think he just kind of caught him flat-footed. But
Yeah,
what he was getting at was, well, is it okay for Israelis to spy on us? And Cruz was like, what? I mean, people spy on each other. That was, he was obviously kind of taken aback by where he was even going with that question. Give us the down low. I mean, it is because it's such a broad question. Now, the way I would have answered it well, what do you mean by spy on us? Like, what do you mean by that? Do you have what specifics? Do you mean come into our country and try to spy on us in Washington? Is that what you mean? Because if that's the case, then well, I mean, there'd be an FBI investigation, and we would address it. Like, it's not like we just let it happen, which was sort of unfortunately, how that conversation unfolded. It's like, oh no, we just let it happen, but that's not really true.
yeah,
But it's also true that in many past years, like as you said, like the Israelis are very honest about how about their intent in many ways. Like their entire goal is always preservation of the Jewish state. We'll work with you when we need to. If our interests don't align, that's okay too. And they would, there's certainly a lot of cases of like them like just keeping a really close eye on Americans in their own country, in
yeah,
Israel, and maybe in the
yeah.
region. My understanding, though, that dropped off quite a bit in recent years. I don't know how much you can speak to that. Like, if you were asked that question by Tucker, like how would you answer it?
I would answer it. I would say, look, the Israelis had a bad experience with the Pollard case, right, where an American intelligence official was recruited. That's like what, 40 years ago or something like that, right, in the 80s. They got burned for that, and the lesson there was it worth? Was the intelligence worth the pain they went through afterwards in their intelligence relationships or diplomatic relationships, their social relationships with the United States? And I think the Israelis,
Well,
by and large, that
can you explain just the quick story of what that case was, so people
yeah, well,
know?
Yeah, Jonathan Pollard, he was an American citizen. I believe he was Jewish, which gave him some religious affinity towards the state of Israel, and he was working, I believe, in naval intelligence, and he believed that the U.S. wasn't sharing enough intelligence with Israel to help it defend itself, right? So he took it upon himself to share intelligence that he felt that Israel needed. And at the time, there was there was daylight between Israel and the United States on information sharing. So it was the perfect storm, if you will, of Pollard had the will and the access, and the Israelis at the time, they felt they had the need uh, and the right to more intelligence from the United States, and they had a unit that was dedicated towards collecting on the United States, very very strategically, very hush hush. And so they recruited him. Eventually, he was caught and he was sentenced to prison. He was held in prison for over 30 years. He served his time. He was released a few years ago. He moved to Israel. No surprise there. Right? They gave him citizenship and they welcomed him. He probably has a pension and everything else, right? But the bottom line in the story was the Israelis saw that the intelligence they gained was not worth the pain they went through for several decades after that with the United States, right? And
Yeah.
nowadays, my feeling would be that sure they monitor us, but I don't think they actively collect against us. I think they realize that there's just too much to lose there.
Yeah, that would have been my understanding as well. And, unfortunately for Senator, like he's not on the committees that would even, I think, tell him that. And I just hate that that's now out there in the public, that this idea that this is happening, is again, I
Mm.
think that you just answered the question perfectly. Like, two things can be true at once. Things have happened, but it's been a while since there's been anything close to that. And of
Right.
course, no, it's not okay. We've never said it's okay. This guy spent 30 years in jail,
Yeah.
and it's like there's this belief system in certain corners of our politics that's like, everybody's bought off by the Jews, the evil Jew globalists. And
Yeah.
it's like there's the misinformation is really coming to a head on the internet right now. And, I think President Trump's doing a great job of just, frankly, just first of all, pushing the Israelis to wait so they can at least try to broker a diplomatic deal, which gives
Yeah.
him the moral high ground to take whatever action he feels is necessary. And I think we don't exactly know what that action is. And as we
Yeah.
discussed, I mean, there's a few different options, but it does seem clear you can't really go back now. It's hard for me to imagine a
Right.
scenario where everyone agrees, like, all right, the Ayatollah can stay in power. He's agreed to all of these things. that'd be a that'd be a tough one
Yeah,
to see that working out. But
yeah, have to agree.
a lot of unknowns here. Anything else
Yeah.
to add that maybe you're seeing that needs to be debunked or addressed in this wild conversation that's been happening this week?
Well, two things. One, the intelligence relationship between the U.S. and Israel is very close, right? A lot of give and take there. But again, all intelligence relationships are, overshadowed by the national security interests of each country, right? And at the end of the day, U.S. intelligence employees work for the U.S. government, so that's whose interests they have to serve, and the same with the Israelis. So, there's always that natural tension there. But at the same time, Israel is the only functioning democracy in the Middle East. It's the only country that shares very similar values with the United States, right? And so we have much more in common than we differ with them, right? And so, for both sides, there's a lot to be lost in any kind of foolish spy games, and much to be gained by just cooperating to the maximum and understanding the limitations of that collaboration as well.
Yeah. Any last thoughts on or predictions with your unique crystal ball on how the Iranian people,
Yeah.
hopefully gain their freedom? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know.
I think I said on our last discussion that anyone who tries to predict what happens in the Middle East is on a fool's errand there. But particularly, look at Iran and Israel. These are countries that are very adept at misdirection and miscues, right? So, looking for clarity in their messages, looking for clarity in their media. There's nothing there. The only clarity we're going to get is from actions, right? And these are going to be the actions that the Israelis carry out and the actions that the Iranians carry out. Because I think the one lesson that both sides have learned is that um, deterrence is not a concept. Deterrence is action, and the Israelis have proven that, to the ultimate with their actions of the last week or so.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a lot more to come. It could wrap up in a few days. It could wrap up in a few weeks, maybe a few months. Well,
Yeah,
hard to predict.
yeah,
Hard
yeah,
to predict.
yeah.
Ralph, thanks for coming on again.
Sure,
I know
Dan.
you're
My
kind of
pleasure.
on vacation right now, so appreciate you taking the time.
That's right. Let me
And
put a plug in for Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It's a great place to hang out. So,
nice, nice. I'm happy for you. I'm happy for you. We're slugging it away here in Houston. I'm glad to
there
be
you go.
home for
Yeah,
once. But we'll be
yeah.
right back in DC next week. So thanks for doing this.
All right. My
And
pleasure.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. See you
appreciate you.
back in DC. Take
Sounds
care.
good. Bye.
Bye.